Okay, hello everybody. Sorry for the bit of delay here, but we're very happy to welcome you all to this afternoon's talk on lessons from Rwanda and Bosnia and Herzegovina. And this is the second in our series, Building Community Across Divides, Lessons from Near and Far. And we're many thanks to many of you who have come from near and far for today's talk. So in the spirit of our last series, which was on the Native American presence in this area, I want to begin with a land acknowledgement and acknowledging the land from which we're all tuning in. And some of you may be coming from various places along the Connecticut River. And from my home in what is called Conway, Massachusetts, I'd like to acknowledge that I'm on Nipmuc land, and I'd also like to acknowledge the neighboring indigenous nations, the Wampanoag to the east, the Mohegan and Pequot to the south, and the Mohican and Mohawk to the west, and the Abenaki and Pennacook to the north. So to briefly introduce myself, I'm Polly Byers, and I'm the Executive Director of the Karuna Center for Peacebuilding, which is an NGO based in Amherst, Massachusetts. For those of you who may not know, Karuna started over 25 years ago in Bosnia, focused on bridging divides in countries affected by violence, and has worked in over 40 countries since then. So this is the second event in our series, Building Community Across Divides, which examines different approaches to building community, both internationally and in the US, looking at how techniques in dialogue, mediation, and other community-based approaches that Karuna has used over the years can be used to heal divides and interrupt cycles of violence closer to home. So the series goal is really to inspire and build support around efforts to bridge divides in the US. And we launched it just a few weeks ago with Karuna's founder, Paula Green, and her partner, talking about their project, Hands Across the Hills, which has been nationally and internationally acclaimed for its use of dialogue to build relationships across deep political divides here in the US. And today we are extremely lucky and excited to have other very famous Karuna alumni and peace-building experts who worked closely with Karuna over many years, Vahidin Omanovic and Seth Karamage. Vahidin is joining us today from Bosnia, and is the co-founder of the Center for Peacebuilding in Sanski Most. And Karuna first met Vahidin when he participated in Karuna's post-war dialogue and reconciliation programs in 1997 through 2002 as a young teacher. And since that time, his organization has done groundbreaking work in bringing ethnically diverse youth and religious leaders together, and was a core partner in Karuna's recent program in Bosnia, Societal Transformation and Reconciliation. And I think we may have Amra, who is the Bosnia country director, on the line with us today. And Seth Karamage is joining us from Rwanda and is currently a technical expert in dialogue, mentoring, and training within our current program in Nigeria. And he manages the Strengthening Rwandan Administrative Justice Project out of UMass-Boston, and recently led community dialogue coaching for Karuna's Healing Our Communities project in Rwanda, which supported the reintegration of ex-genocide perpetrators back into their communities. So these are big topics we're talking about, and we're trying a different format with this talk and having Miki Jacevic, who is another Karuna luminary, a very close partner of Karuna's from the beginning, and a former board member who is a native of Sarajevo, and he's vice chair of the Institute for Inclusive Security in Washington, D.C. And we'll have Miki will interview Vahidin, and Olivia Dreier, Karuna's former executive director and now a senior peacebuilding advisor working with us, will interview Seth. So the idea was that they will each speak separately and then have a sort of a joint discussion about the similarities and differences and the experiences in the two countries. And then we are going to open up to question and answer. So please feel free to use the chat box during the talk, and we will collect questions and then ask them at the end. And if you could keep yourselves muted while they're talking, that would be appreciated. And I'm going to hand it over to Miki. And again, thank you all for being here.
Thank you so much, Polly, for organizing this and the entire Karuna team. I'm Miki Jacevic. I do live near Washington, but we are now in Guatemala, which is my country in law. I'm married a terrific Guatemalan human rights leader. So if the internet is weak, blame it on the, I don't know, global issues. But for now, I do want to first honor Dr. Paula Green, who I'm assuming is one of those boxes, who really is the engine that actually introduced me to Vahidin almost 25 years ago, when he was even younger looking and much more energetic, and who remains an inspiration to me, both as a person from Bosnia, but also as somebody who really embodies the mission of Karuna at its core. So we have about 20 minutes for our portion, but as Seth and Vahidin best know, each of the questions would take a whole day to really properly address. But just Vahidin, to get us started, if you could just very briefly remind us of what happened in our homeland some almost 30 years ago.
Well, I would say that most of people who are present would know that we had a bloody war that started with ethnic cleansing in 92 and ended up with the genocide in Srebrenica in 95. And then we were lucky to have Dayton Peace Accord, and then the war was over. Well, I would say the violence was over, mass violence. The war continued, and even today we are still struggling with the political issues, and unfortunately the political leaders still don't have a common language to really solve the issue so that we can start to live a normal and peaceful life.
Great, and you know, I think, and the purpose I think of this series that Karuna is doing is really how to learn from the Bosnian and Rwandan experience and how it applies to the American context, right? And I think, you know, I remember coming to study actually conflict resolution all those decades ago, and so many wonderfully good-hearted Americans were so confused with the concepts of war and genocide and how can all this happen. And sadly, you know, I think if anything, the last 4 or 5 years unearthed these deep divisions in the United States that Karuna has dealt with internationally. So Vahidin, if you can take us back to those, I think it was as early as 96, the war ended, as you said, in 95. I really agree with you. The violence ended. We still have a very frozen conflict with a lot of political manipulators exploiting the divisions, which is again something Americans can be very aware of. But Paula then gets in touch with some of these amazing women in Prijedor and sort of develops this idea of her coming to Bosnia. And while Karuna had some presence before, and obviously Paula has done this work internationally, it really was the work with the Bosnian educators, including the Bosniak Muslim teachers from your hometown of Sanski Most, and then the Serb Orthodox teachers. And so can you just tell us a little bit more about the program itself, what it did, and why it was so critical for the country at that moment?
Mm-hmm. Well, I can talk about the program from my perspective because I was a participant. I was forced to go to that program because it was late 97, and I wasn't really ready to sit and have dialogue about what happened. I needed acknowledgement. I needed an apology. I needed many things, but didn't really need a dialogue at that point. But the school principal forced me to go, and I went, and I didn't regret. I really understood that it has to be us who will be working on establishing justice and establishing a joint narrative that will help us heal all the wounds that we got during the war. And for me, of course, it was scary. It was the first time that I sat with people from the other ethnic group, and Paula did a great job for not asking us to forget about it, not asking us to pretend like nothing happened, but she was very straightforward and asked us to talk about the experiences that we had during the war. And this is the point where I actually realized that this wasn't just another international program, you know, blah, blah, but it was really a program that could bring us to healing. And then I stayed with the program until the end, and was lucky to come to United States, to Vermont, to School for International Training, again, thanks to Paula, to study more about conflict transformation. And then I returned to Bosnia and continued the peace work. For me, the program was life-changing experience and a place of healing. And I still today, I'm grateful for the opportunity that I got there.
Well, thank you. And imagine 25 years ago, literally right after this happened, and then, another parallel between Bosnia and Rwanda, it was early April that both wars and genocide started, and the journey of healing, our war was much longer than theirs, but it takes decades, and it takes this kind of grounding that you spoke, that Paula provided you with. And I want to emphasize two things you really are saying, which again are relevant to the American experience, that people need acknowledgement, and hopefully they can get an apology. And I always say the world runs on 3 A's, triple battery A, acknowledgement, apology, and also action, to really sit in that dialogue like you bravely did. And then the other aspect of Karuna work that sadly is very counter to the American experience, if you will, which is just forget about it. And how people of Rwanda and Bosnia cannot forget about it, but can again be given tools like hopefully the Americans can, to deal with these issues. So we then fast forward, if you will, 25 almost years after that original program that started in, obviously with Paula, and lots of wonderful experiences, multiple workshops, the whole program, certificates you'll receive. What Vahidin is now talking about is his great experience of then establishing his own pioneering peace-building organization in Bosnia. And then that organization becomes, under Amra's great leadership, part of this consortium that Karuna had for the last 3 years that continued this reconciliation work. So can you speak more about this last version?
Yeah, we were again lucky to be led by Karuna Center for Peacebuilding in designing and then implementing the STAR project. STAR stands for Societal Transformation Reconciliation, and we were one of the 4 Bosnian partners. Others were Youth Initiative for Human Rights, PRONI, and Small Steps. And our part of the program was to organize peace camps, peace caravans, and then youth-led initiatives. And we started with peace camps many years ago, but today, of course, we are following the wishes and the need of the youth today, because the needs of the youth of Bosnia today in terms of what they need in order to get to know the other side is different than what it was back in 2002, 2003. And then we also realized that Bosnian youth don't have necessarily a chance to travel to different parts of Bosnia. So we came up with this great idea of a peace caravan, where we, after the peace camp was completed and after they got to the process of getting to know each other and talking about really hot topics such as identity, prejudices that we have about each other, how to do dialogue, and then being in dialogue about hot topics that are currently important for the youth in Bosnia. Then we would take them for 5 days to travel around Bosnia. And we had youth, obviously, from different parts of Bosnia, and most of them were before the peace caravan were never in these communities, especially the smaller ones like Sarajevo, Banja Luka, and Mostar were kind of visited by the participants even before, but not again by many. But it was interesting to observe reactions of the participants when they came also to Sarajevo, Banja Luka, and Mostar, but especially in small towns, how they were afraid, how they weren't really sure what to expect. And we asked them to really talk to ordinary people, to like shop owners, to taxi drivers, to people in the streets, and to see what they think about reconciliation, to see what they think about peace building. And I have to say that most of them shared that they were shocked how people were actually supporting the idea of youth coming together, learning about each other, and seeing how we can work together for our joint future. for the country. And we asked them one question before we started the Peace Caravan, and that was, how do you feel about Bosnia and Herzegovina as your, motherland and your own country? And we had many who said, I don't have any feelings, or I don't really like it. We had one who said that he hates it. He can't stand not even the name. And then we ended up this caravan in Doba in a beautiful medieval castle. And then the final round was, how do you feel about your country now? And it was, very touching, and to see this transformation and how much actually they were affected by what they seen in these 5 days. And for us, this was like the brightest point of the program. But then their task was, after they returned to their communities, they were supposed to organize actions on their own. Of course, we were there to supervise them, to support them, to help them out. And again, most of the youth activities were very inspiring and amazing experiences for the youth, because it was for the first time that they actually, most of them for the first time, did something around peace or about peace building in their own communities. And they were afraid how their communities would, especially the smaller communities, how people would react. And actually they were very much supported by their community members, and the experiences were amazing again, which led us now, after some months after the project is over, we have now most of them are being involved in peace building activities in the communities, and they are now eager to continue with their either youth activism or peace building activism. And now we're trying to figure out how we can continue all together and see what we can do for improvement of our lives in our communities. I have to say that the biggest challenge in the last year was this the COVID-19 situation, and I have to say that we were lucky that we had a peace farm, which was an open area, and then according to the law we were able to gather more than 20 people, so it gave us really space to organize everything that we planned, even more that we planned. So it was wonderful that we had this space.
Wow, that's again so inspiring. And to wrap up our portion, and we'll travel to Rwanda then, you mentioned some of the direct challenges, issues of fear, people afraid of dialogue, issue of going back to your communities. Again, wonderful set of tools that Karuna provides so that people can indeed continue this work. But again, you've done this for 25 years. In addition to running several of these organizations, I always am so proud of you and what Paula had given us all, which is embodying dialogue as a human being. And for those of you who don't know, Vahidin is also an imam. So he beautifully shows the best part, if I may say, of our religion through the dialogue that he embodies. So for you, Vahidin, both personally and professionally, what are some of the biggest strengths and then some of the challenges of dialogue?
Oh, biggest strengths. I mean, for me, the history of our lives in Bosnia, I would say, are the biggest strengths. And we can, like my generation, we still remember the time when we lived together. And of course, with that coexistence comes also knowledge and wisdom, which I want to say, I don't want to be modest and, say it's part of our being, it's part of our identity, it's part of who we are. And then again, the challenges today are not even close to challenges that were back in '97. For example, when I came to the seminar for the first time, I wanted just to hurt somebody. And now, but we had this experience of living together. We knew tradition of each other. We had many friends from different sides. So this was very fresh in our bodies and in our blood. Yes, we were wounded, we were hurt, with everything that we needed from the other side, but we still had the experience of living together. Now this generation don't have that, and unfortunately most of them don't have that, and most of them, unless they have really intention to go and meet somebody from the other side, they don't have a chance to meet and talk about important issues with the young people from the other side. So that's something that is missing, and that's something that I would say the biggest challenge is that young people of Bosnia today don't have a chance on a daily basis to sit and talk and get to know somebody from the other side. And of course, fear and the narratives and, you know, all the burden and the political situation. We still have politicians who deny genocide, who deny ethnic cleansing, who deny the state, who deny the laws, and the hate speech is pretty much present, not only in social media, like that's another problem, but the politicians are using hate speech without being held accountable or being punished for that. An international community who is in Bosnia still very much present. I mean, we have American Embassy who is issuing wonderful statements and following what's going on, but the Office of High Representative, who is supposed to be preventing these kind of things, they're not really doing much, except that they are very much concerned.
Thank you, Vahidin, and we'll hopefully have more chance to answer some of the questions and reflect more, but I'm going to turn it over to Olivia now.
Sorry, muted. So thank you so much, Miki and Vahidin. It's so interesting, and I think there'll be a lot to compare. So we are moving now to Rwanda. As Miki said, the Rwandan Genocide in 1994 was around the same time that war was breaking out in Bosnia, and I think it'll be really interesting for us to compare the processes of reconciliation in these two countries that went through such huge tragedies at similar times and are still working with the aftermath. So Seth, to start us off, can you just give us, hate to do it so quickly, but just the 2-minute picture of the genocide and its aftermath, because for some people it's long ago.
Yeah, thank you very much for this great opportunity for me to be in this conversation, and happy to share the Rwandan experience. Just like you said, Olivia, Rwandan experience or history regarding the ethnic violence and the divisions we've had is quite long. And if I was to talk about it, it would take us hours and hours. I'll try to be very brief. So basically, as some of you may know, Rwandan conflict goes back at least more than 6 decades ago, where it started in 1950s, you know, after, you know, even before independence, where, you know, ethnic groups started, you know, seeing themselves along, you know, economic activities, farmers and herders, or Tutsis and Hutus. And after independence, the regime that got to power started actually, you know, fueling and propagating divisionism, dehumanizing one group and humanizing the other. And that kept on, you know, going on and going on until, you know, the 1994 genocide you might have heard about, which was genocide against the Tutsi. So it was being really fueled and propagated and run by the former regime. So this is something that befell Rwanda as a country, and almost 1 million people were killed. You must have read and heard about all this history. But what is so important that we are going to discuss here today is actually what was the impact or the effect on the Rwandan society after this 1994 genocide against the Tutsi. So when you think about the new government, what it was really facing, the government faced with the challenge of having, survivors scattered everywhere, having no support in terms of, healing their wounds or even giving them shelter and all other necessities for them to live and feel that they are really back to life. And a lot of influx of people were returning from different parts of the country, and the perpetrators also scattered everywhere. And the government was supposed, to arrest all those that were called perpetrators. That was a huge challenge. And yet this is a government that was promoting unity and reconciliation. Here, survivors are crying and they want to see the perpetrators being punished or even killed. And the government wants to see people being united and reconciled, but it was a huge challenge. Then employed Gacaca, the traditional justice. Gacaca did what it could, but prisons were all filled. And what had to be done is actually to take care of the victims, the survivors, and the perpetrators also who were becoming victims. Here is actually where the challenge became a very, very, complicated issue to address, where you have the youth who were born, or the children who were born after the genocide, who do not know the parents to whom they were born from, orphans. You have women who were left with no help. You have, perpetrators who are serving their sentences and they're coming out of the prison and they cannot integrate with the community. All those are the challenges the government and the civil society at large were facing. So that is what Rwandan government faced and Rwandan society at large faced as an impact of the genocide. Let me stop there and then we can talk about what we are doing with the Karuna Center.
Thank you. It's a really good summary. And so as Seth has said, the challenge is just enormous after a genocide of that scale, with close to 1 million people killed, with several 100,000 who probably participated in the killing at the urging of the then extremist government. So much to repair. So just, I'll give you a very brief picture of Karuna's involvement in Rwanda before Seth happily joined our work a few years ago. Paula Green actually went to Rwanda shortly after the genocide and did training in nonviolence in the Hutu refugee camps that were in the Congo. So that was sort of our first experience. And then in the early 2000s, we began doing various reconciliation programs, both working with government and with civil society, all focused on reconciliation with government in preparation for this traditional justice, Gacaca, that Seth mentioned, that went on for, 5 or 6 years in every single community throughout Rwanda, the sort of restorative justice program. And we worked with a national network of women's organizations, so a variety of programs. We were also bringing students from the School for International Training from around the world for field seminars every year to learn from Rwanda. Then the genesis of the program that we started in 2016 that Seth became a part of was this recognition that the Gacaca trials were over. Perpetrators, especially if they confess as part of this unity and reconciliation effort, got very reduced sentences, so either prison or they did alternative service, community service. But then they were all returning back to their villages. And unlike in unlike in Bosnia, that it is quite geographically separated, especially as Vahidin described, the youth often don't meet somebody from the other side unless that's arranged. In Rwanda, pretty much every village in Rwanda was mixed, Hutu and Tutsi. So that those who killed in the genocide were coming back into the communities, living next door to survivors, very often families where they had killed family members. So the challenge was just enormous. And the program we then developed, working with 3 local partners, Rwandan partners, one focused on dialogue, one focused on trauma healing, the Rwandan Genocide Museum that was working a lot with youth. was to think about a structure to support this reintegration of the ex-perpetrators that everyone knew was going to exacerbate the already existing tensions. And so now back to you, Seth, to describe a little bit how you saw that program working, particularly since our theme tonight is on dialogue, particularly the role of dialogue in that program, successes, challenges, how it interwove with other aspects of the program.
Thank you. This is really something that is so interesting to me. When I sometimes start talking about it, I become a little bit emotional because of reflecting on what befell our country and seeing what we saw from these programs or from this approach we did with our communities. We chose at least a district from all the 4 provinces. That is East, North, South, and West. That is how Rwanda is politically or administratively divided. So we at least worked in 5 communities, and we trained what we called community dialogue facilitators, empowering them to be able to meet with the survivors and former perpetrators of the genocide, to see how they can talk together, and worked with the youth. These youth that we targeted, these are the youth that were stigmatized, stereotyped, because most of them are born to the women that were raped during the genocide, and they don't know nothing. And these are youth who actually, their fathers or their parents are in prisons, and they are being stereotyped and stigmatized by the community. And we also worked to see that we could heal the wounds of those people, be it the survivors or the former perpetrators. Because with the trauma, it is not only with those whom we considered to be the survivors, but also those who perpetrated the genocide. Because we really faced a very big challenge as a civil society and the Karuna ourselves and the government of Rwanda, seeing the perpetrators coming back to the communities and feeling that they are going to be reintegrated, and they have served their sentences, whether it was 15 years or 16 years or 12 years, according to what the sentence was, and they feel like we have finished our sentence and we are free to come back to the society. And when they came back to the society, the survivors, when they saw them coming back freely, walking freely around, they became so much traumatized. The wounds were kind of, reviving and resuming, remembering what happened. And in that aspect, or in that situation, they really needed more help. Preventing the survivors or the victims becoming the perpetrators, recurring the cycle of conflict. What did the Karuna do? It was to make sure that we train what we called trauma healing companions, the youth champions, and also the community dialogue facilitators. These 3 components of the project worked hand in hand, but first the foundation was a dialogue. From the dialogue, where we created a safe enough place and reaching out to these individuals whom we identified very strategically, knowing how they are concerned with the history of the country. There are those who had just come back from the prisons. There are those who were in the community as survivors. And there are those who had fled the country back in 1960s. So we would identify those and identify whom can be trained and start reaching out to those key stakeholders or participants. And we started reaching out to them individually, making sure that at least we walk with them through that journey, making sure that they can be able to feel confident and they can feel that they are rehumanized, whether they were perpetrators or survivors, and those who fled the country a long time ago, and when they came back, they found nothing from where they were, where they had, been born from back in the 60s and 70s. So we brought a series of dialogues, and it is from those series of dialogues, if Laura, you can actually share that picture I requested you to share. It was from that series of dialogues, people started opening up. And when they started opening up, they then started feeling free, because the approach we are using was to see that those perpetrators could be free and could feel free to speak from their hearts. And it would be the same actually to the side of the survivors. And from there, we could identify those who have some trauma wounds, whether perpetrators or survivors. And when we had also, thank you very much, this is a picture we got from a district of Gashora. Gashora is a district in eastern province of Rwanda. This is one of the districts that experienced a huge and the biggest part of the atrocity that befell, Rwanda. It is from this kind of gathering where people would sit down. We allowed people to speak whenever they want. There are so many perpetrators who were afraid of talking. They would come, sit quiet, go back, and when they go back, they get, attacked and confronted by those former other perpetrators who are still, hesitant to speak out. And also the survivors would come and sit for several days, for several rounds. When they start opening up, when they cry, we spot them as people who need trauma counseling support, psychosocial support. And we work with the HERO, which was one of our partnering organizations on that aspect, and they start helping them with the trauma healing companions. So when they come back for the second round, then they open up more. Those who were actually afraid of talking from either sides would start talking together. They would join until we got some people opening up. One day, from this particular dialogue, a gentleman called Gahiji, actually who could be the one, I don't know if I can point at him, I'm not the one sharing the screen. He knelt down and told his story. That was some time back around September 2018. He knelt down and he told his story to those who have been seeing him, and he had finished his sentence. When he spoke, the survivors opened up and started crying. And they said, I quote one lady who said, Mr. Gahiji, for today I see you as a human being, but I have been seeing you as a killer. But because of your truth, you have told us, confessing all you did in this district that we all knew, even when you served your sentence, I feel like I'm healed and you are my friend. That was after several days of meetings. Yeah. And from that, these people started working together, reaching out to the people from the perpetration side and from the survivor side. And the group started expanding. Then the district officials, the local governance officials started asking them to be, sharing these stories and actually moderating and facilitating reconciliation programs or activities during in a month like this.
Yeah.
Thank God that we are actually talking about this today. It is when we are remembering and commemorating the genocide in Rwanda. This is a complicated month in Rwanda. So these groups we built in all the communities, in all the 4 provinces of Rwanda, they have been now embraced by the local governance because they are the champions of reconciliation. Their stories are being put on the National Unity and Reconciliation and aired on national television of Rwanda, seeing these true stories being told. So this is something you have seen. The youth, let me go back to the youth.
We have just a few minutes, but please go ahead,
Yes, going back to the youth, those that were stigmatized, they got a platform. to feel rehumanized. Those who are born to the perpetrators, they started talking together. Intermarriage was a very complicated issue among these youth that are born from the perpetrators and born from the survivors. It was so difficult. When we started these programs, the youth reunited, started working together, building houses of the survivors, bringing back their fathers or their parents who have finished their sentences, and talk to them and bring them into these dialogues. So at least these youth became the champion of reconciliation again. Yeah. And their trauma of confusion, where they're coming from, started also reducing. So let me stop here and maybe have more questions on this.
Yeah, no, thank you, Seth. That was a very full picture, and just highlighting a couple of things. I think as in Bosnia, involving the youth who grew up in the shadow of these genocides was so important. And this quality of rehumanizing, as you've described it, I think it goes to the very essence of dialogue, that somebody who was just a killer and nothing more becomes actually a human being when there's a structure that allows them to speak with an open heart and with authenticity. And I think that was something I know we worked hard to do in Bosnia and worked hard to do in Rwanda as well. I think one feature in Rwanda that was particularly important, I think you'd agree, was that the trauma healing was done with survivors and former perpetrators together in the same workshops, so that people realized that whether you survived this horrible period or participated, there was a traumatic aftermath. And I think that helped also with the humanization, as well as you said, Seth, reaching up to the district officials. We also had these national listening sessions so that policy that could support the effort could also be influenced. So thank you for that. I think we would like to just take a moment with Miki and Vahidin as well to get your thoughts on the comparisons of the two experiences and lessons learned for the US. Both Seth and Vahidin did graduate work in conflict studies in the US, so they have a good sense of our context. So I would love to hear from both Vahidin and from Miki and from Seth about, just in listening, what feels different, what feels similar in the situation in Bosnia and Rwanda, and your thoughts about lessons for the US. Vahidin, let's start with you.
Hey. I wasn't sure who's gonna start. Yeah, it was, what's different is the current situation in terms of how the government is established. That Rwandan government is seeking for unification, for people to come together, whereas in Bosnia, Bosnia as a state or as a country is divided in so many ways. We have two entities. We have district of Brčko. We have then cantons. So and this is a big difference. And also politicians are not working on unification. Rather, they are working on just keeping the status quo and these divided lines. What's similar or the same is this power of transformation that happens in dialogues. And when Seth was describing, I mean, this is exactly what's happening in our programs. And as you said, it's really, it happens every time when we create a safe space for people to come and speak with an open heart. And that's where the rehumanization we are witnessing on a daily basis, that rehumanization is happening, and then that leads toward the reconciliation among the participants. And do I talk about lessons for United States or?
Sure.
Yeah. Unfortunately, your society went through a very tough period, and I can see that there are many wounds are being not maybe necessarily created in this period, but brought up to a surface, and a lot of issues that were maybe not visible before are very visible right now. And I think that lessons learned is the same. It's the dialogue. And American peace builders, you need to come together and start creating a safe space for people, as Paula did already. I love how she carried out that program, just to create safe space for people to come and have dialogue about the issues that are important for them, and see then how they can find a common ground. And I know that there is a lot of potential. There are many wounds, there is a lot of pain, but still a lot of potential in these wounds and in this pain, so that American society can really go forward. And I'm so happy that the political situation is different now. I mean, the government is different, and that also reflects on our situation in Bosnia. So I'm looking forward to see how we can jointly, especially if you need any experts from the outside of United States, I mean, feel free to let us know, and we would love to help you out with designing dialogue actions.
I think it's time that the US has experts from other parts of the world. Truly, we need them. Seth, do you have thoughts about lessons for this country?
Yes, I do have some lessons. Let me first say that it's very important to be very mindful, thinking about and seeing the role of the government or the role of leaders in promoting what I would call hate and dangerous speeches. Because for hearing leaders talking and segregating and discriminating openly on, radios and public media, it's very dangerous. And this is where we came from. And it started back in 1950s, and we ended up into a genocide. So if the US government, with its democratic values and freedom, is not very careful to really stand up and say, any leader who is free to just segregate people and talk like how our former regime was talking, that would lead the US into a terrible situation like we went through. So the other thing, the lesson, of course, and I was just comparing the past of Rwanda and the past of the US and what you are experiencing, seeing how the US society is divided now. The government of the United States needs at least, to borrow from the Rwandan government's experience. We were very much divided, having an ID saying, yes, I'm a Hutu, I'm a Tutsi. And you would just present that national identity card to wherever you are going, and you would be, given some attention or get discriminated because of who you are. But in the Rwandan government today, you will never be tolerated if you are caught promoting such divisions among the society. Whether you are from civil society, whether you are a family member, whether you are a teacher, whether you are a politician, you will be actually answerable to justice. So that is something that we appreciate from the Rwandan government. And that has laid a very good foundation for us people in the civil society to promote peace that is building sustainable reconciliation. So that is what I would wish to see happening in the United States, trying to track down. Of course, there is this, influence of social media where people are free, just like my colleague Vahid was saying, that politicians from Bosnia are free, to propagate divisions. That is very dangerous. And if that is not really, prohibited, even when you are doing whatever dialogues you can do, it would be very difficult to prevent that. But it should actually be the first thing, to deal with. So that is really helping us in Rwanda. If you are somebody who still believes in seeing a big nose and a small nose, just like we used to divide ourselves along, and you just go and see somebody who has a big nose and say, you Hutu go away, you will be arrested that very day. That is at least something that we appreciate from here. So the same thing in the United States, in Bosnia, governments should at least be seeing people as one, not seeing people from their skin colors and where they are coming from, whether they are new in the country or they're indigenous. Those are dangerous things that led us into the tragedy we are facing today. So it's really good to have some good policies and respect the constitution of the country that brings people together and keep them one. So whoever is a leader should actually respect that. And that's what the Rwandan government is doing, and it's helping us, the civil society people, to promote peace we are doing.
Yes, no, thank you, Seth, very astute. And unfortunately, our country has been through several years that looked very different from that. So really important. Maybe, Miki, I'm sure you have thoughts, and maybe while you're speaking, we can encourage others to pose their questions.
Yes, please. And again, thank you, Seth and Vahidin, Olivia and Paulie, obviously, for this great platform. As I said, each question would have taken an hour and a half, and we managed in an hour to cover these two countries and decades of Karuna's work. But two reflections on the US right now. While I completely agree with Seth and Vahidin and their reflection of the different role of the government and the importance of politicians, having done this work for 30 years, I really emphasize the community dialogue, the perspective. So yes, no question, Seth is correct. Leadership matters, politicians matters. The hate speech obviously needs to stop. And at the same time, as somebody who has lived in the States now for a while, what gave us Trump? What do we do with 75 million votes, right? All of that work has to, and my slight apprehension actually is that the Biden victory might again sweep many of the issues under the rug. So I actually think divisions were there, they're here. It is really now, how do we do three things? How do we do Karuna-like work across America, across the communities? So leave the kind of congressional debates to their own. Remember, and that's actually the key distinction. Politics is about debating and which idea is going to win. In dialogue work about reconciliation, that's not possible, right? And therefore, my kind of both apprehension and hope for the United States is, how do we really make this work very relevant to the people of the United States, so that this is not something out there? It's very much historically needed in this country. How do we indeed stop this great tendency of American people to say, let's focus on the future, forget about the past? Who focuses on the past, etc. But really to say there are many historical wounds in this country that were never even opened or let alone discussed. And the third one, how do we sustain action? How do we really continue to keep at this in a country that in many ways, yes, inspires the world to continue this democracy experiment, but also has many, many, many challenges.
Great, no, thank you. And while we're waiting for questions, which we really welcome, questions and or thoughts for any of our folks to comment on. Paula, you were so involved in all of this. I'm wondering if you want to make a comment or two.
I would be very happy to make a comment or two. First of all, it's mostly what I want to say, Miki and Vahidin. It's just such a joy to be listening to you and to feel the two of you together and remembering all the times that we've spent together in Bosnia and in this country and at SIT in Vermont. And our history goes back now, most of Vahidin's adult life since he was a young teacher. And Seth, I don't know you, but I know your country so well, starting in 1995 when I worked in the Mugunga refugee camp. And it's in my heart. And Bosnia and Rwanda fell apart at the same time. You know, that was that early 1990s period, was this tragedy where both of these beautiful places were split into hateful enemy camps. And when I work now in the United States doing all the bridging dialogues, I always talk about your countries and about how quickly things shifted, because the ground underneath had been prepared for negativity and not been talked about, as Miki said, and not honestly explored. And when we worked in Bosnia, we kept saying to people, you've got to talk about these things now and not leave it on your kids. But I went back to Bosnia with Karuna Center 2 years ago, and it was the kids that I'm talking to now. And the kids are now 25, and they're saying, our parents didn't talk to us.
Right. And
as Miki was saying, in this country, we try to make sure no one talks to anybody about anything important. And that lays the seeds for more violence and more alienation. So all the work that all of us are involved in this lifetime is this work of encouraging people to humanize and see each other and develop compassion for each other's stories, and to understand that a person is larger than who they voted for, and even larger than a certain piece of behavior which may have been awful. It's not the whole story and the whole person. And there's a lot of lessons to learn here. So thank you for this, and thank you for being here with us today. It's wonderful.
But one thing that strikes me listening, and then I see we do have some questions coming, but and in thinking about lessons for the US, is that in one big difference between Bosnia and Rwanda is in Bosnia, there was this possibility for geographical separation, especially after the war. It sort of increased after the war. In Rwanda, people couldn't separate. There was no possibility for it. In a way, they were forced to live together again. And so there had to be a way to do it. And I think that was challenging, but also created a healthy pressure. I think in the US, you know, speaking of the Pioneer Valley, we're in a progressive bubble. So there's this more of a or coastal differences, or, you know, red states, blue states, there's more of a possibility for that kind of geographical separation, where one then has to be very intentional to create the kind of community dialogue that you're speaking of, Miki, and that, Paula, that you were able to do between Leverett and Kentucky. And that Vahidin, you've worked so hard to do through your peace camps, where you're bringing Bosniak and Serb youth together who otherwise wouldn't meet each other, and then traveling together in these peace caravans through towns from one side or the other. So there is that challenge, I think, also there. But Polly, over to you with questions that are emerging.
Yeah, no, we've got some great questions. And just to echo the huge thanks, you guys did do a very impressive job in an hour of covering, you know, the depth. I mean, and you did a fabulous job, all of you, of really saying a lot about both Bosnia and Rwanda, these incredibly huge and complex situations. And there are a lot of, I actually am interested in your thoughts about initiatives about huge truth and reconciliation commissions that are being talked about in the US, but I'm going to ask one from our friend Linda Trop, who says, in your view, what programs, policies, or processes are needed for the transformations that emerge through dialogues between individuals from different groups to foster broader trends toward humanization and transformation in each society? Did you guys catch all that? It's a good question.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, we can even see it from the chat.
Yeah, you can see it. That's right.
Yeah.
So, any of you?
Should I go first?
Sure.
All right. Well, it's very difficult, really, to compare the size, the situation, and peculiarity of Rwanda with the US or any other country. Rwanda is a small country with only 12 million people. And imagining the landmass and the population of the United States, if we were to, suggest something for these two countries or even Bosnia, it's quite difficult. But what I would say, for me, what I would see as, some programs and policies that would really emerge from these dialogues is, first of all, thinking about generational programs that are targeting the future leaders, or that would target the youth through education curriculums. What I'm seeing actually that would change the mindset of a divided society is having these dialogues, but having a government that allows the civil society, because there are some governments that would not even allow the civil society to have this chance to share all these good approaches that would keep people together, understanding their differences and coexist. So there are those governments, like our brother was sharing from Bosnia, who do not mind about keeping people as one. So if we are lucky to have such, and if they're not even there, but can let us keep, talking about these good things and share good success stories of, people who have transformed from, those ideologies of divisionisms and bring them to the public media. They influence the policies and laws of some countries, depending on what they are going through. And also trying to make sure that what is happening in schools, right from primary schools, secondary schools, and tertiary institutions, is very important to look at. Because when you hear what is coming from these dialogues, putting your ear to the grassroots, targeting, divided communities and trying to see them coming together, and you bring this up, policymakers do listen to what you are bringing up. And they also like to see people reuniting, and they like to see the civil society doing their work. So basically, I would say a combination of, grassroots-based dialogues, bringing them to the public media, and then trying to inculcate such dialogues into schools, changing teachers. Teachers are very, very good elements of peace or violence. So when you are developing a policy that promotes sustainable peace, that promotes dialogue in societies, it is good to always look at what is happening in schools. Because it is from these schools, whether they're school dropouts or graduates who become good leaders, who go into business, they are all built from those places. And for families, the school for families, for households, it is the public media. So looking at what the public media is doing is actually very important. But all that has to be borrowed from what you are hearing from the grassroots people talking through dialogues.
Seth, I'm just thinking about the power of story. And I know in our program, the youth actually made short videos of reconciliation stories that came from our program and spread them through national media, through social media. And then we created a documentary that was on Rwandan television that tracked several reconciliation stories, and ones that were complicated, that had challenges and nuances. And that's gotten shown, I gather, repeatedly on national television. So I think people are drawn to story, and that can have a huge impact. And I'm thinking with the program that Paula did, the Hands Across the Hills, it was a small program, but picked up by New York Times, BBC, you name it, because it was such a powerful story. So I think sometimes these small programs can be really magnified by that. And also, we worked really hard to reach the policymakers, I think, both at the district level and at the national level, by bringing our community members to speak with them. A lesson we learned from you, Miki, from the inclusive security work of creating these listening sessions where you get policymakers listening to those who are actually experiencing things on the ground.
Okay, should we move on to, or Miki, do you want to say something?
I want to jump on. Great idea from, is it Naomi? I'm sorry if I'm not pronouncing Naomi Yanis's great comments.
The infrastructure.
This is a terrific idea. And just to say, indeed, There's a big umbrella group called Alliance for Peacebuilding that often profiles Karuna's work. And we've already started to figure out, but again, here is where we need the mass movement of American peace builders that Vahidin is talking about, to reach out to the congressional staffers, even not the members, to really say, part of this, and it can be very simple, but you are, so I will say one, also a common experience between Bosnia and Rwanda, and I've seen this throughout, and I'm also addressing the gender question somebody else was asking about power of women to get these bridges started and work. In both countries, it was actually the women that Paula met who were doing originally entrepreneurial type of work, growing coffee in Rwanda or in Bosnia, doing the agriculture work together. So there's a lot of research and a lot of emphasis on how do you start reconciliation. It often is through the groups that can bridge divides, and you do it with a connection to the development. And so, Nomi, this is a terrific idea. I hope you and others from the Valley, even maybe connecting with Polish people in Kentucky, can bring this up to the fore, because it's that tangible action part where you can work on the acknowledgement and the deep divides, even in this time, but really how do we indeed literally work together to move this country forward?
Yeah. Yeah, no, it's a great question and suggestion. I wanted to go to another one, a very sort of practical hands-on from Trisha. It's like, when community segregation is a challenge, what tips do you have for getting people to show up? You know, and I think that can happen at all different levels, but as people are wanting in their own little communities, big or small, to start dialogues, how do you do that? And how do you do, she goes on, how do you deal with asymmetries and desire for reconciliation, which I'm sure is often the case. If one group wants it more than the other, how do you approach that situation? So it'd be great to hear your thoughts about that very common dynamic.
I'm curious, Vahidin, do you find in Bosnia that there's different level of interests on the different sides or among different groups? And if so, how do you work with that?
Yeah, I mean, definitely we had challenges to recruit young people from some areas of Bosnia, and we used all the connections we had. We used every possible way to get some people from these communities, so that we could at least have few that we can teach, and then they can go back and work in their communities, hoping that, you know, they will attract more people. But mainly we offer them, like we tell them, would you like to, I don't know, experience new things? Would you like to learn new things? Are you ready for new adventures? Like we find a way to attract young people using, you know, what's attractive for them. We don't invite them, come and sit and have dialogue about what happened 25 years ago, you know, because that's kind of, I don't know, boring for the youth. But we get very creative in recruiting them and attracting them to the programs.
Yeah, I'm glad you talked again, because it was a question you've all brought it up about youth and engaging youth, and obviously, you know, it takes a different approach, you know, and I think it's interesting in the STAR and the more recent program that Karuna had in Bosnia that you were very involved in, of the peace caravans and peace camps, in the situation where they didn't have the chance to get together, and how you try to, you know, I'm thinking about in the US context, you have very segregated societies in lots of places through this country, and how you bring people together. I mean, there's things like sports that can be, you know, places where people get together, but of trying to find opportunities of bringing together, whether it's youth or not, of people who don't necessarily connect in their normal lives. But I think, as you said, thinking creatively about how you do that, particularly focusing on youth, is really important.
Mm-hmm.
And I think also thinking about the places where people are already together. You know, I know in some places there's been really good work done with religious congregations of one kind or another, where they may have very different political beliefs, you know, very different backgrounds, but can create opportunities for dialogue in that context. Universities is another really good place where young people are coming together. Then how do you create, or high schools, or as Seth was saying, throughout school, how do you create opportunities for genuine dialogue and interest in the lived experience that may be very, very different from your own? And I think so many assumptions are made about other groups without actually hearing directly from people and understanding the life experiences that have shaped their perspectives.
If I may also respond to the question that Polly asked about, you know, the challenge of having two divided communities coming together. With our approach, if you really think about bridging divided communities and you just walk in a community and you bring them together, that is not a divided community. The first step of our approach is what we call preparation of participants, of which most of you, if you are peace practitioners, you may know about this. Preparation of participants is, first of all, having a very good advocacy strategy with government officials where you're going to be working from, be it at the ministry level or maybe at the district level. I'm just talking from the Rwandan or any other African administrative structure, and going down to the community level and identifying those key stakeholders from both sides, the sides of the society that you are considering to be divided, and have a very good advocacy, showing them what your project would bring about is the first step. But the most important step above all that is preparing those participants. Of course, the members of the divided communities or societies, they all hate to be told that, let's talk together. So the most important thing is to see those, you know, people who are yearning for bringing their community together, that are drawn from among themselves. You talk to them, you teach them the strategy, the approach, and then they go and meet those people separately and talk to them and ask them about their concerns before you even plan for the dialogue. And they start by telling you that this is not possible. You are just wasting your time. You're not going to yield anything. But when you keep explaining that if you have any concern, let us look at it. And then when you address it and they decide on where they want to meet from, where they want to establish that forum, where they can meet on a regular basis, you know, talking to their respective leaders, community leaders or stakeholders, you see them coming together. But you cannot just bring them together without going through those approaches. It is very critical to go through steps for you to get critical and most influential and concerned members of the society who will go back and start, you know, bringing together those other members that are affiliated to them or connected with them from the ideological beliefs and values they have.
Thank you. Thanks, Seth. I'm curious, I'm just throwing in a question I mentioned before. There is this piece of legislation in the US Congress, and I think Cory Booker introduced it in the Senate, for a US Truth and Reconciliation Commission, which is sort of in development. It's in gestation phase right now. And I'm curious as to, you know, of looking at the experiences of Rwanda and Bosnia and lessons learned on what do you think, what would be your thoughts? Because it really is it's an idea, it's a piece of legislation and nobody knows exactly what it might look like. But what would be your thoughts based on your experience of or advice for these people who are putting this thing together, of of either approaches or, yeah, at what level you might, I mean, you know, what level, right? Are we starting at the community level? How you might go about it? I mean, because it really is. It's a challenge to figure out what that would look like. So, what would be any thoughts you guys, any of you might have?
Drawing from our Truth and Reconciliation Commission's experience, what we've gone through and what I have seen us doing is, first of all, to be careful and considerate that the people who would be really, you know, teaching the society about this policy or the concept of the commission itself, bringing people together, they are so divided and they have their own wounds and they have their own perspective where they are coming from. That is something to be very careful about. Meaning that they need to undergo a very good, you know, training, transformation to make sure that among the commission itself, there are no people who will actually spoil the good intent of what is written into that, you know, truth and reconciliation concept. Second is also really understanding that the country itself has its own divided groups that are being, you know, addressed. And from doing that, of course, that's why the commission is being put in place. But who is actually in position to be maybe the head of the commission? Where is that person coming from? Here in Rwanda, it was a huge challenge when the commission was set to see that they have a Hutu, because when they saw a Hutu heading the commission, they would say, how come that a Hutu, when we know that Hutus are the ones who killed Tutsis, just as it's commonly said, that how come that they are giving this position to Hutus? How can they be the people to champion the reconciliation of the country? But with this, it's really very important for people to know that, you know, for those who were perpetrators, they are just individuals. And to prevent victims to become perpetrators, it is to watch out that kind of ideology or attitude or perception about people, generalization. You know, it shouldn't be a society that is generalizing and looking at somebody who comes from a certain party or a certain ethnic group or a certain racial group that should be the one to head the commission. It should be anybody who is a person that has a reputation despite where he or she is coming from in terms of ethnicity, religion, or race. You know, US is very diverse. It's not just like Rwanda, right, that is just two major ethnic groups. You know, so that is something to consider. Victims can be perpetrators, and perpetrators can become victims if the commission is not well managed.
I wonder, thank you, Seth, and Vahidin and Miki, I wonder your thoughts. Bosnia never was able to have a Truth and Reconciliation Commission. It was way too hot politically. Would that have helped?
Oh, I think so. I mean, again, as a failed academic who looked into that exact question, comparing it to Rwanda and South Africa, and then studied in Guatemala, I would say, so the world doesn't really fully appreciate, but there have been 44 countries that have had truth commissions. And let's be honest, some of them did more harm than good, right? So just having a commission for its own sake, I don't recommend. However, I do think there are three key approaches and lessons. Number one, it has to be locally rooted. So Seth's point about the National Commission and the membership is relevant, but especially in the United States, and there have already been some efforts in North Carolina, other parts, it has to be in the reality of the part of the country that is addressing the past grievances. The second element, it has to be not only diverse, but it has to be very inclusive and public. And that is what we lacked in Bosnia, that all the work that Vahidin does, that's why he's my hero. He does it, but it's like that ship that got stuck in the Suez Canal, right? We needed those little tugboats, 1,000 of them, to get it unstuck. And that's Vahidin in many, many other brave Bosnians, but without having that kind of public approach, we are now doing this in a systemic way that South Africa appreciated. And the third element is, and I know this is a hot topic in the United States, but without some kind of acknowledgement and reparations, and not just economic reparations, but again, injustices, addressing this in our history, really trying to truly reconciliation means let's come back to the circle. And the truth commissions that were not cognizant of the importance of reparations, who just looked at the past and kind of established the history record, which is important, the expectations will rise. And this country, in that sense, I don't think is yet ready for it. So it's a lot of elements that come into play.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you. Gosh, Vahidin, your thoughts.
I want to say something, but Miki covers it all. So I'm grateful. I would just want to say that for me, also as the TRC would be important to have that the history textbooks that are being studied in educational system are as important. And also what I've been discovering more and more, the history that we've been studying, that we are studying right now, that our kids are studying right now, and I'm positive in the States it would be similar. They're just telling one side of the stories. So we really have to together work on getting that narrative, together, in the textbooks that will be honoring all the experiences, not favorizing one group over the others. And I think that's also a point where we need to start working on solving the history that we don't even know what the history was.
That is such an excellent point, Vahidin. I mean, it has been at the forefront of this series on the Native American presence of what is the history. Many of us don't really know the history because it's not the history that we were taught or we learned. So that is just, I think that's a great point. And I think we have to end it on that great point, because it is, I want to be conscious, it's very late where you guys are. And just a huge thank you to all of you, to Miki, to Vahidin, to Seth, Olivia, and always Paula, who she's right there in the box above you. But, it was really wonderful. It was a big effort for all of you to make time to do this. So a huge thanks, and a little plug that next week at this very same time, we're going to have it should be a really interesting talk focused on Nigeria from Dr. Fatima Ekilu, who is head of the Neem Foundation, our partner there, and Tim Phillips, who's head of Beyond Conflict, really looking at the issue. You guys, we've been talking about rehumanization. They're really focused a lot on looking at understanding dehumanization, polarization, how it happens, what kinds of tools can be used. There's a lot of neuroscience research that Beyond Conflict is involved in. So that's going to be the focus of next week. So a little plug for anybody who can come. But thank you all who attended, and especially the four of you for being here with us. It's an honor and a real pleasure. So thank you all.